Welcome to Scary Stories. Today we've got an extra special episode featuring the best stories of July 2022, all compiled into one extra long bingeable extravaganza. We've got 11 stories in this one, all allegedly true, and I think you're going to like them all. We've got a number of executive producers making this one happen, including the great CS and Kathy Barrickman, but this special is mostly dedicated to our #1 supporter and patron in England, Godzilla Tm. We start off with 2 stories dedicated to him, and I think we end the show with a third Godzilla Tm story too. So thank you to Tim and our other executive producers. They're the only reason this show even still exists. Let's start off with a new one that nobody's ever heard before. We just got this in the email last week, and we've decided to call it I Interrupted a Dogman and a Bear. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I was hiking off trail in the Hiawatha National Forest in northern Michigan a few years back when I had a very brief encounter with not only a dogman, but a big old black bear too. Here's how it went down. I came through some bushes and I tripped over a vine or a root or something because I almost fell. As I caught myself, I made a Homer Simpson dope sound and I laughed at my clumsiness. Relieved that I hadn't fallen on my face, I stood up and prepared to continue on my hike, when I looked up and saw that I was being watched. Judging by the posture of my observers, I had interrupted a conflict between an adult black bear down on all fours and some kind of a real-life werewolf. The werewolf had the head of a giant wolf, but the body of some kind of humanoid canine. He did have hands like a man, but they ended in these talon-like claws, not unlike those you'd see on a large raptor bird, like an eagle. Like long curved ginsu knives, much harder and sharper than fingernails. He was probably very tall, but he was bending down in order to get in the face of the bear. It appeared he was the aggressor in this situation, where the bear only seemed to be trying to walk from one place to another. Neither of them were looking at each other, though, and neither of them looked angry. They were both looking at me, and they both seemed pretty confused by my presence. Maybe they'd never heard a Homer Simpson impersonation before, I don't know, but these 2 large predators were both fixated on me. The expressions on their faces shifted from surprise and confusion to indignation and even rage. They were no longer having a conflict with each other. They were now losing their collective temper with me. I stopped looking them in the eye and I looked down at their feet instead. I felt my way backward through the bushes that I had tripped through, and I tried to get back out of their view without taking my eyes off their feet. I was hoping they would stay where they were until I could put some distance between us again. Before I could pull myself through those bushes, though, I saw both the bear and the dog-headed man begin moving toward me, and I just turned and ran. Well, I may not have fallen down earlier, but I fell repeatedly on my face, tripping over everything under my shocked and numb feet. I could hear at least one of the beasts following me, and yet somehow I made it into a clearing and ran like a madman toward a couple of guys who were sitting around a campfire. One of them held a rifle on me until I explained myself, but then they let me sit on the other side of their fire. They told me the dogman won't come near a fire unless they're either starving or if they're holding a grudge against you. They told me I'd be safe as long as I was there with them. But eventually, when it got darker, they were going to put out that fire and they were going to go to sleep. They claimed they had no room for me to sleep, so they were advising me where the closest ranger station was and urging me to hike there before it got any darker out. That was kind of the last thing I wanted to hear, because I was genuinely afraid of going back out into the woods while it was getting darker. I asked them if they would mind me pitching my tent next to theirs, and they were giving each other these looks that told me they just wanted me to leave. Just then, out of the woods, that dogman burst out, and when he saw me, he roared this sound that I'd never heard before. It wasn't like a lion's roar, or a tiger's, but it wasn't like a dog barking either. Both the men uttered expletives and grabbed their weapons. I could hear the explosions as they fired behind me, but I was already off and running in the direction they had told me that the ranger station was in. Under the cover of the trees, it looked a lot closer to night than I would have hoped. This time I ran on the strength of pure adrenaline. I don't know how long it took me to find the ranger, but it had felt like 2 minutes to me. I flew. And then once they gave me a seat and asked me to tell them what had happened, I think I passed out. I didn't wake up till the next morning, when I opened my eyes to find myself sleeping in a jail cell. That's not the first thing you want to see in the morning. It turned out they carried me in there to sleep off whatever had happened to me. They assumed I was drunk or tripping and didn't realize I was just in shock, so they had not alerted any medical personnel. They were telling me I could leave when I told them that I had really wanted to make a report. I started trying to tell them about the bear and the Dogman, but it didn't seem as urgent under the morning light. These guys were drinking coffee and yawning. My story was boring them, and I started to wonder why I was making a report at all. I saw a bear in a national park, big deal. How could I tell them that I also saw a huge, upright walking wolf? They'd go ahead and give me some kind of breathalyzer or urine test or something. Finally, I just asked them the closest place to get breakfast, and I left the rangers alone. It was nice of them to let me sleep in one of their cells for free, I guess. After breakfast, I sat looking out the window of the little restaurant for a while. I was seeing the green hills in the distance and thinking over my plans to head back out there for more camping. But then I remembered a motel I had passed earlier with very cheap rates. I figured I could afford to stay there that night and still have enough left to catch a bus home in the morning, so that's what I did. And that's how and why my ideas about living off the grid in the forests of America came to wither and die on the vine. It was just one of those things that wasn't meant to be, I suppose. Who knew that I would go back to city living just because of something so random? Who knew that my life would be altered forever just because I interrupted a dogman and a bear? Today's episode brought to you by the You Won't Believe My Dogman storyline of t-shirts, wife beaters, and hoodies. Wear this outside and watch the conversation start. Who wouldn't want to hear your Dogman story after seeing that t-shirt? Find out who's cool immediately with the You Won't Believe My Dogman story t-shirt, wife beater, or hoodie. Nab it for yourself or a Dogman loving friend. Link in the description. I tried to run over the Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, things have been hard on me and my family, so I lost my temper when I saw that monster run out of the woods on that night. It made what I interpreted as a threatening move toward me and my dad on a night when I could not deal with any more hostility from anyone. I was sick of being treated like an animal by people, and so I guess I tried to take it out on that Dogman. I've got to explain myself a little first, but then I'll give you all the details of exactly what happened. I'd been working in media in Atlanta since I got out of college decades ago, but I'm originally from Michigan. That's where this story took place at the end of last summer, or I guess maybe it was autumn, because the leaves on the trees were not all green any longer. I had been called back to Michigan because both my mother and my sister had been forced to undergo a medical procedure by their employer, and both had sadly left us as a result. These were not jobs they needed, they were jobs they took to keep busy. My father's savings paid all their bills, so it just all seemed so unnecessary and horrible to me. I was very stressed out when this story happened, but it did in fact happen. I had my father in the car with me throughout the Dogman experience. No, I do not have a dashboard cam, and the only proof I have is the word of myself and my father. Why I would want to tell a story like this if it weren't true, I don't know. It does not flatter me, so make of it what you will. So a few years ago, my family had moved to a house near Lake Gogebic, and one night I was driving my father home from a social event that he couldn't get out of. I had never seen him so down, and it was all I could do to keep my own feelings bottled up. I knew enough to know not to act happy, so I just focused on staying alert and busy making sure that things got done that needed to get done, and keeping my own feelings inside as much as humanly possible. But seeing my dad in this state got me angry. I shouldn't have to apologize for feeling protective of him, especially not in a time like that. So we were driving down East Shore Road, which runs right near the lake but is surrounded by trees and affords no view of the beach or anything like that. And in fact, it feels like you're driving in the deep woods, at least until the leaves fall in the winter. And as I'd already mentioned, they hadn't gotten around to that yet. There are these little roads leading off from East Shore Road, and I honestly don't know where most of them lead to. Sometimes when you peek down the road, you'll see a mansion, or at least a house. Other times you'll see some kind of a fence, or a blockade. And then there are the roads that just seem to lead off into nowhere. It was from out of one of those roads, that seemed to lead to nothing, that I saw the Dogman emerge from. My initial reaction was one of surprise, quickly followed by curiosity. My father started screaming that there was a wolf standing up, like a bear, and I guess that's a pretty good way to describe it. The front legs, though, they didn't seem like normal wolf front legs. They seemed kind of almost more like arms. They seemed even more like arms in a second, but I haven't gotten there yet. So I beeped to warn this guy. I didn't know if he was an animal or a man yet, but I could clearly see that he was a guy, to get out of the way. I was not in the mood to slow down at all. So did the whatever it was back off or run away or even move out of the way? No, it did not. And it didn't freeze like a deer might either. Instead, it just sort of launched into this really over-the-top West Side Story sort of pose, like he was showing off how scary and badass he was, but just ending up looking like a Broadway dancer. I had been dealing with lawyers for the hospital for over a week. There was nothing left on planet Earth that was gonna scare me. In fact, I was so insulted that this hairy upright dog, this animal, was telling me how it was gonna be. He was gonna tell me. I slammed my foot down on the gas and I drove that car directly over in the direction of that obnoxious monster thing. My father was screaming at me to stop. He even grabbed my arm and tried to pull me away from where I was trying to drive. But he was unable to change anything. We drove at some speed well over the limit, directly toward that beast. And as we got close, I could see every hair on his scabby body. I could see the blood caked into his gray fur. I could see his tall dog ears held back in anger. But one thing I never saw when I looked at that beast was I never saw fear. A second from annihilation, that animal had no fear in its eyes. And then, later than should have been possible, he leaped up and somersaulted loudly off my father's car roof. I saw him land safely and elegantly on the road behind us when I turned to look. I screeched to a halt, and I'm not exactly sure why. I was so surprised by what had happened that I stopped the car, and I leaned out the window to look back at that thing. That canine yet manlike thing had just performed an act of athleticism unlike any which I had ever seen. My father was shouting at me to get out and go see if the animal was all right. In fact, I did open the car door, but only to get out and have a better look at that thing from where I was. It sure was large. It really was bear-sized. Why was I not familiar with this kind of an animal species? I'd never seen or heard of anything like this before. And then, while I was watching it, wondering how badly hurt it might be, and what my responsibility was in that moment, the creature stood up like a man, again, revealing that it wasn't hurt at all, and my knees buckled as I climbed back into the driver's seat. "Is it all right, son?" asked my father. "Oh, it's fine, Dad. Don't you worry about that," I told him as I locked up and put the car back into gear. We took off down that road like we had robbed a bank, but the Dogman was on our tail almost immediately. We were going over 60, but that thing kept up with us, and my father was shouting out an angry prayer, asking God why his family was being punished like this. The creature, whatever it was, ran effortlessly alongside my driver's side window, tapping on it whenever he could get close enough. I was so fed up with that taunting animal, as well as everything else I'd had to deal with, that I was about to swerve the wheel left and try to wipe the smirk off that animal's face. Suddenly, he took a sharp left turn into one of those random side roads that lead off of East Shore Road that I told you about before. He was out of my sight in a second and gone. My father told me to slow the car down, but I was honestly expecting that thing to jump out of a tree on top of the car or something like that. I was completely paranoid and really scared. I got us back home as fast as I could manage, and I made my father wait until I'd made certain the coast was clear before letting him get out and go inside. It honestly did feel like my family was cursed, and that's the only reason I reacted so terribly when I saw the dog-headed monster thing. I had no right to drive toward him that way. I was becoming the same as those soulless institutions, forgetting to respect the sanctity of life in a real sense, not just with words. But acting out of anger did nothing to improve anything. It only got that dogman angry at me. It only placed my father's life in danger as we sped down that narrow road at well above safe speeds. Nothing good at all comes out of losing our temper, even when we feel as though life has been very unfair to us or those we love. Acting out of spite or malice is never justified, and never makes any of your problems any better. And I learned this on the night when I tried to run over the Dogman. If you want a fine fellow, then you sure want him. I'm talking about Godzilla Tm. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer Godzilla Tm for making this episode possible. Godzilla Tm is a channel member who receives all our perks, like our archive of over 25 hours of secret episodes, and then sometimes he donates to us either through our PayPal or by using our new thanks button under each of our YouTube videos. That's sorta like Super Chat, but for those of us who don't do live streams. Godzilla Tm is a big reason why we're even still on the air, so thank you, Godzilla Tm. Henry will be along at the very end of the show with important deets about how you can become an executive producer. But now let's jump into our next story, which is called Dogman versus Hatman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Okay man, I got a story for you that you aren't going to be able to explain away so easily. I think the world is cracking apart. And I think that's where all the weirdness comes from. I don't mean ordinary weirdness. I mean the kind of weirdness your channel is supposedly about. People call them cryptids because they don't understand. The word monster was fine in the first place. These are not undiscovered species. These are monsters that might literally come from nightmares. But wherever they hail from, it's not the same place as lions and tigers and bears, trust me. Once you realize the Dogman is not an animal like a squirrel, then you also realize it has more to do with the shadow people than it does with normal wolves and dogs, or humans for that matter. The way I see it, Bigfoot and aliens have more in common with ghosts than they do with any kind of creature that you'd find in the Philadelphia Zoo. I have had a few experiences, and I'm going to rattle a couple of them off for you in this email so that you can understand where I'm coming from and why I'm saying these things that I'm saying. When I was a kid, I was bothered by a shadow man. He would come out of the closet in my room and he would stare at me. I could sometimes see eyes in the shadows. I mean, there was no shadow where the eyes would have been, if that makes sense. As though someone flat with the eye holes cut out was casting that shadow. Usually I couldn't move when I was looking at him, but there were a few times when I could turn my head, and then I saw something dark with a long snout staring in through the window, looking at that same shadow man I was looking at. Another time I remember I got up and ran out of the room to my parents' room, so obviously my sightings of the shadow man did not always come with sleep paralysis. As I got older, I heard people start talking about the Hatman, and the next time I saw the shadow man, I noticed he had a wide-brimmed hat, sort of like a cowboy's hat. While it was happening, I felt like I remembered that he had always had a hat on, but when I think back on it, I'm not so sure. Did he actually have the hat on before I had heard of the Hatman? Had I just not noticed? I don't know, but he always had the hat on every time after that. So I had seen the Hatman for a long time, before I ever saw my first Dogman. I only saw Dogman in my last 2 years of living at home with my parents in New Ringgold, Pennsylvania. It's a small town, but it's surrounded by some of the most awesome forest land anywhere. That was where I spent as much of my time as I could, since I was old enough to travel around on my own. Instead of going home after school, I often would walk around in the woods for as long as I thought I could get away with before heading home for dinner. I even used to do my homework out in those trees, so I got to see a lot of strange stuff. Well, maybe not a lot, but a lot more than I was led to believe was out there by my science teachers. I know you want to hear about the Dogman, and yes, I did have some experience with him that I am leading up to. I'm hoping you'll appreciate that to me, all this stuff was sort of combined into one thing. It all felt like it was related, or as I said before, possibly from another kind of place. Another dimension, another world, another reality. A window world? I don't really know what I'm saying, but I'm certain in my gut that something like that was what was going on. One afternoon, I saw a glowing ball of light in the woods, and when I tried to follow it, the light always seemed to stay at the exact same distance from me. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. It made me very confused. But it was also kind of cool to see something that looked so impossible. I figured it was some sort of optical illusion, and I tried to forget about it. But then another day, I was taking my extra-long scenic route home, walking through the woods, with my friend we called Turtle for some reason, and we both saw that same kind of light all over again. I had told all my friends about that glowing ball of light, which I could never get any closer to, so Turtle was excited to get to see it for himself. We both immediately set off running toward the glowing ball, but it seemed that this time we had no problem getting nearer to it. It smelled truly bad around that light, and we both felt nauseous. Then the light emitted this sort of heavy sigh or sound just like that, and it rose off the forest floor and started floating away. As it did so, we could hear leaves crunching, as though a large man were walking away on autumn leaves. First of all, it was spring, and second of all, we could see nothing making impressions in the tall grass. We could hear someone walking, but all we saw was a glowing, floating ball. Explain that one to me if you can. So I got in the habit of getting home before sundown, after I started to see what seemed to be that same Hatman who used to visit me in my bedroom at night. He was harder to make out in the woods, because there are no straight flat surfaces in there. When the Hatman moves over trees, he moves in curves, not in straight lines. It's a lot harder to make out his form much of the time. He can get much taller out there in the woods, though. He isn't limited by the size of your room or the height of your ceiling. I always saw him as a living shadow. I did not see him as an invisible being casting a shadow. I assumed the shadow itself was alive. And when I saw that shadow moving around independently in those woods, I knew it was time to go home. I saw him possibly 7 or 8 times out there, and in spite of its apparently human form, I began to think of it as some kind of nocturnal forest creature. And then came the evening when I woke up in the woods, having realized that I had fallen asleep. It was already pretty dark, and I was in danger of encountering the Hatman again. I have nightmares that start this way, waking up at night in the woods, knowing I have a long way to go before I'm home, knowing I'm on the turf of some pretty dark things that I like to hide and creep around in the night. I was thinking so much about the Shadow Man that it was all I had on my mind. Granted, he is a threat, but so is tripping over my own feet. So are cougars, you know what I mean? The Shadow Man had not ever physically attacked me, although I had heard stories from some other people I knew, who he also paid house calls to. I was devoting too much fear to the Shadow Man, and it caused me to get careless and walk right up to within 15 feet of a dog-headed hairy humanoid with glowing eyes. That SOB was huge, and my eyes teared up, making it hard to see. I thought it was a space alien. Those eyes were glowing so bright. I don't really know if it was eye shine, or if it was actual internal lighting inside those eyes, but in either case, it made that thing look like it came from another world. Maybe it really did, just not a world from outer space. I froze in place and I stared. Here was a thick-armed, thick-legged man, muscles on top of his muscles, and thick fur on top of all that, with a long canine snout and the biggest fangs I'd ever seen. The paws were claws. He looked like the most formidable kind of monster that had ever lived, and he was staring back at... Well, actually, he was looking past me, and above me. I was looking at it, but it didn't seem to even care that I was there. Was this a holographic projection or a residual haunting? Why wasn't it looking at me, but instead behind me? Instinctively, I turned around, and there I saw some kind of shadows being cast in the tops of the trees. All of these dark spots moving around all over these many branches. What was that? Could it be bats taking off in flight? I stared harder and realized that whatever this was, it was what had seemed so interesting to the Dogman. This was why it wasn't even looking at me. The shadows coalesced and swarmed over my body, covering me completely, and I no longer was any place at all. I felt like I was swimming in black liquid oxygen for a few seconds, and then the moment passed, and with a loud, painful popping sound in my ears, I was back there where I had been in the dark forest. Only now the moving shadows were gone from in front of me. Sounds of a large animal in agony rang out behind, and I turned to see the strangest battle I hoped to ever see. The dog-headed man was battling against an opponent who seemed to disobey the laws of physics by his very nature. I saw the shadow move as though it were punching a tree, and at the same moment, the dogman flew backward as though he had been pummeled on his very long jaw. My brain and my eyes were confused. That made it seem as though the shadow were, in fact, merely the shadow of an invisible being. Another time, the furious and increasingly out-of-control dogman grabbed some bark off a tree that the shadow had been cast upon, and in so doing, he somehow now had a grip on the shadow itself, flinging the darkness back and forth into rocks and tree trunks. The upright canine seemed to be out to destroy whatever the Hatman actually was. How could he seem to have an invisible physical presence and at the same time seem to be a living shadow? There were things happening that seemed to contradict everything that had happened before. It was like a series of different laws of nature were continually being deposed from the throne and replaced by another set which made even less sense than before. My only guess is that I was seeing multiple dimensions from the point of view of someone trapped in 3 dimensions, or however many our world has. Maybe if a physicist or a mathematician had been there with me on that night, he or she might have gotten some great insights from what we were observing. But as it went down, I was alone by myself, and when the 2 impossible men battled away from the direction I needed to go in, I took off running toward my parents' home. When I got there, I snuck in the house, ran up to my room, and there was some movie on the TV about the world cracking apart. That's where I got that idea. Reality itself is breaking up, like ice, and things from these other realities sometimes come on over into where we live. At least that's sort of a way to explain it. I mean, it's probably an 8 or 12-dimensional kind of a thing, so it probably can't be fully explained by a guy like me who is only in 3D, not 9 or 10D. And so you see, this is why Dr. Jeff Meldrum won't come to my birthday parties. It's because I don't think cryptids are relic hominids at all. I think they're creatures so different from us that they may as well be actually magic or supernatural. And that's about the closest I could come to an explanation for what happened on the day that I saw the battle between Dogman versus Hatman. CS. I must confess, we feel blessed with thankfulness. Please join me in thanking today's executive producers, CS, one of the greatest supporters our show and channel could ever have. If not for CS, we'd have already been off the air, and that's not hyperbole. She donates to us using the thanks button under our videos, and she belongs to our channel members club too, so she gets all our perks. Henry will be along at the very end of the show with important deets about how you can become an executive producer. But now let's jump into our next story, which is called Joining Dogman for a Picnic. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am writing this to you hoping to find a sympathetic ear in your audience. I had a Dogman experience when I was a troubled teenager in Minnesota many years back, but nobody that I know now will believe my story. First of all, these days, I live in a major city and I work in public relations. I'm known for being among the most gregarious and friendly of all my associates, so nobody believes that when I was younger I was a loner who kept to himself. And the other problem is that here in the city, nobody ever sees the Dogman, so people find it incredibly funny to hear that you think werewolves are a thing. Well, there is something that sure looks like a werewolf that I know for a fact is a thing, and that's what I'm writing to tell you about. The closest I've come to leaving this world so far was that one summer when I was hanging out at and around the Lake Windigo. My parents had left me with my Aunt Heather in Minnesota because they basically couldn't deal with me being a teenager. Heather felt bad for me and let me roam around doing anything I wanted. She would say to me, "Go out there and practice being a man for a few hours." My parents were angry at me for growing up. Only Aunt Heather told me that it was a good and natural thing. So I walked out there into Minnesota, looking to grow up. I had no idea that this would mean I would be tested by a nearly fatal encounter with the Midwest Dogman. That's another problem that my current friends and associates have with my story. The few that know Dogman as anything but a series of children's books think that it only lives in Wisconsin and Michigan. Well, I tell them that Minnesota is just to the west of Wisconsin and Michigan, and they look at me as though I were describing the face of Mars. People in cities seem to think of anything beyond their borders the way old map makers used to think of uncharted regions. Here there be dragons. I shouldn't talk, though, because I never gave a thought to Dogman or werewolves or Rougarou or even Bigfoot for that matter. It wasn't so much that I believed or disbelieved. I just really didn't care. It didn't seem to be an issue that would ever directly affect me. Boy, was I wrong about that. Until you're actually smelling the breath of a Dogman, the way I was forced to. Until one of them leans over you and drools on top of you. You can't know true primeval fear. When you realize you're outmatched and defeated before the fight has even started. When you look into those sinister, merciless eyes and realize this thing intends to hurt you. Only then can you know the fear that ancient man felt before we dominated most of the earth. Meet the Dogman, and you're walking back into a time when we were much farther down on the food chain. Another thing I should admit up front is that I did have an uncle, Uncle Harry, who told me a story about his encounter with the Wisconsin werewolf when I was a young kid. I only thought of that as I started writing just before. I had never associated Uncle Harry's old story with mine, for various reasons, but I shouldn't leave his account out, since he was my closest familial friend when I was growing up. My mother used to tell my father that Uncle Harry was a better dad to me than he was, which was not a very nice thing to say. It was true, though, and I loved getting to stay over at Uncle Harry's. His house was full of monster stuff, framed movie posters from monster movies and all that sort of thing. That's why I don't think I ever thought that his tale of encountering a werewolf in Wisconsin years earlier was for real. I thought it was just part of the entertainment when I would visit my favorite uncle. He'd tell his famous, quote, true werewolf story, unquote. And then we'd watch scary movies. But now since I've had my own experience with a Dogman, it forces me to reconsider the story he used to tell. It was a pretty short story, but I can imagine how terrifying it must have been for him, assuming this really happened. Uncle Harry was still young and in high school, living with his parents. They had company over for a day-long barbecue, and at the end of the night, Harry had to carry a lot of garbage filled with half-eaten ribs and burgers out to the garage where the garbage cans were kept. It was the final load of the night. He had been carrying bags of garbage out there all day. Only this time, when young Harry opened the garage door, there was a big old dog standing up like some kind of Spielberg velociraptor in there, with barbecue sauce all over his long doggy snout, because he'd been ripping open garbage and slobbering all over it for some time before Harry's arrival. They say one man's garbage is another dog's feast, and that big guy seemed to think that my Uncle Harry was there to steal his half-eaten barbecue away from him. The hairy, dog-headed ape-man bent lower, down to Harry's eye level, and he showed off his barbecue sauce-covered canines, the better to eat Uncle Harry with. So what did Harry do? What could he do? He tossed the rest of the garbage from the barbecue at the Dogman's feet, then closed the garage door behind himself and went back inside. He never said anything about it to his parents, and when his father discovered the mess the next day, he blamed it on raccoons or dogs or something. He also blamed himself, not Uncle Harry, and he bought a lock for the garage to prevent repeat events. I don't think I could have been as slick about it as Uncle Harry. I think I would have run away screaming, and the Dogman might have eaten me instead of the barbecue garbage. So I do suppose I did have a history of prior knowledge about Dogman sightings and experiences. I just really considered it a fable. I did not consider that the story might have been an actual historical occurrence. I just thought it was a scary campfire tale, nothing that might someday happen to me as well. But it did, so I better get started filling in the details of my own experience. First of all, I was not then the guy that I am today. I was unhappy and I blamed the world, but some of it was me genuinely trying to figure the world out and come to a better understanding of things. There are these guys who call themselves MAGTOW or something like that. My peers don't just mock these guys. They seem angry at and threatened by them for some reason. But when I was younger, I was kind of just like those guys. I felt the same way. I look at them and I see a younger version of myself. Now I sort of gradually accidentally fell into society and became the social animal I am today. But my life is still based on a similar philosophy as back then. I'm happy with myself, by myself. When people can respect my needs and boundaries, they're welcome to join in my life. In fact, I think I could only be social now because I proved to myself back then that I didn't need anyone else to survive and be happy. This way I'll never depend on someone else to complete me ever again. This takes the pressure off of me, and also off of everyone else around me. When you drop expectations you have of others, then they have a chance sometimes to surprise you. When you expect perfection from them all the time, you're only creating stress and conflict for yourself. I mean, those are healthy lessons to learn about life, and good things to learn while you're younger. Back then, I was still very sick of and impatient with other people. I can see now that it was because I grew up a younger middle son in a fairly large family, and so my voice was usually drowned out. After a decade and a half of not having your vote count, you start to become disillusioned with the idea of other people in general. The only chance I had for peace or sanity was when I got away from the others. That was why I would hang out like some creeper in the woods around Lake Wendigo. There's a lot of vacation establishments over there, so it's hard to find land that isn't private. But somehow I would manage to do it. By then I had superhuman loner instincts, and I could find nooks and crannies of the world to settle in so I could watch the water moving or watch the clouds continually morphing. I guess it was sort of the beginnings of me discovering concepts and practices like meditation and Zen. I realize now how important it was that I had the chance to do nothing, in silence, for a few weeks at that particular point in my life. But just as important was the absolutely horrific thing that happened next. Although I was an angry young man, mad at the world for mistreating me, I had no idea that all I was complaining about has another name, and that is the natural way of things. I was mad at the world for being the world, and I hadn't even met any predators yet. Well, that was about to change. Now, it is true that the dogman I encountered snuck up on me, but it is also true that he did not attack me from behind. He leaped out in front, and if I had been prepared for such an eventuality, I had a fair fighting chance to elude capture or even win the battle, possibly. But I was a self-pitying, unhappy kid in a young man's body, and so I was completely taken by surprise when this musky, smelling wall of a man-thing burst out of the bushes and blocked my path. I looked up and saw a kind of face like I had never seen before. It looked like a dog, and yet it didn't. The eyes seemed somehow both intelligent and yet inhuman, or feral. I could see that it was smart, but I could also see that it was ruthless. And it was hungry. There wasn't going to be any negotiating with that thing. Imagine looking into the eyes of a man and being able to tell his emotions by the way his big old dog ears moved and how much of his gritted teeth he was showing to me. It was both animal and man at the same time, and I suddenly had my first moment of adult-level fear. I'm not saying this only happens to adults. Sadly, too many kids learn this kind of fear as well. I'm just saying that up till then, my fears were the childish kind. Will mommy still love me? Will I ever find the girl who loves me? And that sort of thing. Not minor in any way, until you have your first adult fear. Those kinds of fears are not about failing to gain something extra in your life. Those fears are about losing something you were taking for granted. Losing your health, losing a limb, losing a loved one. Those are grown-up fears and pains. And for the first time in my life, with that inexplicable creature, both man and not man, standing in front of me and shedding all over me, I understood on a very real and deep level that I was in fact going to die. It might happen any second, or I might get lucky and get out of this situation, but it was unmistakable in my heart that I was a finite being. I was here for a limited time only. I was and am temporary. Here today, gone tomorrow. My parents and teachers never taught me that in all those years, but the dogman schooled me about it in under 5 seconds. I turned to run, and that dogman reached out with an incredibly long arm and grabbed me on the top of my head. Tight. I had not consciously noted earlier, but this thing had paws that were sort of a lot like hands. Have you ever seen those basketball players with hands big enough that they can hold a basketball with one hand? That's what this creature man was doing to my skull. Only unlike human b-ball guys, this guy's fingers didn't end at the end of his fingers. No, The ends of his fingers were where his long claws started. I could feel those fingers painfully gripping my head just above my eyebrows. Yet, I could see those talon-like claws extending down over my eyes, biting into my lower lip in the front and my upper neck in the back. And once he had a tight grip on me and arrested my attempted escape, he lifted me up in the air. I'm saying this creature had his arm fully extended out in front of him. Then, he lifted me up with that one arm. I must have been 140 or 150 pounds in those days, and it's a lot harder to lift a weight with your arm held straight out. You can't put your back or your knees into it. You can only use a few muscles in your arms to do the job. It's a crazy thing that he did. You'll have to take my word for it. And then I guess he flung me into something. I remember flying. I know I passed out after that. I don't know how much time passed before I woke up squinting at an incredibly bright light, feeling completely disoriented. I had landed hard on my back on a hard surface and I was winded, gasping for air as I woke up, hurting all over. It seems as though the Dogman knocked me out by throwing me into something, then somehow woke me up by dropping me on this surface. I had no idea where I was, only that it was hard and glaringly bright. At first I thought I was in a mad doctor's lab, but I heard birds singing in the distance and an airplane flying far overhead. So then I thought maybe it's a mad scientist's laboratory outside? The Dogman leaned into my field of vision, sending my heart going. The release of adrenaline accompanying the sight of him made me try to sit up, but fail in pain. I was outside, not in a lab. That light was the sun. I was on a wooden picnic table, with the Dogman leaning over, literally drooling on me. I was not bound to the table, but I was so weak from being thrown around that it was going to be a while before I sat up and walked, let alone run away. And how far had I gotten when I tried to run away the last time? I had gotten thrown on this picnic table to be the Dogman's lunch. That's where running away had gotten me. Did you ever see that old 80s horror movie Waxworks? You remember the way the rich vampires in that one don't suck your blood from your neck? They make delicacies out of your blood and your meat, and then they dine on you around an elegantly set table. That was me. I was dinner on the table. And that Dogman may as well have been tying his bib around his neck before digging in. Something inside me looked at those giant teeth, as big as my freaking head, and said, "Okay, we lose." I passed out, and I don't think I remembered who I even was when I woke up again later. Someone had put smelling salts under my nose to wake me up, and I remember blinking into the bright noonday sun, wondering what these moving objects were in front of me. Slowly I recognized them as humans. I remembered what eyes were, and mouths, and people, and I remembered my name and my identity. But for a few joyous moments I still didn't remember all my troubles. I didn't remember my anger, my emotional pain, my unhappiness, and most of all, I hadn't yet remembered anything about the Dogman, said a man, finishing a sentence that I hadn't heard the beginning to. He was talking about the Dogman, and now a woman was there asking me something about the Dogman too. I remember saying doctor or hospital or something like that to them before passing out again. So the story as it was pieced together for me was that this middle-aged couple saw me on the picnic table with the Dogman leaning over me. And according to them, they ran at the Dogman waving their arms in the air and shouting, the same thing they said they'd do to scare pigeons off their lawn. For some reason, seeing them coming, the Dogman abandoned me on the picnic table and fled into the surrounding woods. Now, this couple was quite eccentric, and so instead of asking me if I was okay or if I needed medical attention, they asked me how I got to hang out with the Dogman, like it hadn't occurred to them yet that I wasn't there willingly by my own choice. They thought I was in some kind of consensual relationship with a man-eating cryptid, and I guess maybe they were jealous or something. Still, they saved my life, whether by accident or not, so it would be better karma for me to just shut up and be grateful to them. So I'm going to make a disclaimer here that I'm sure this was a once-in-a-lifetime happening, and it was quite some time ago since this went down. I haven't ever heard of another Dogman sighting at Lake Windigo, so I would say it's probably quite safe if you want to go on vacation there. I don't really have any complaints, you know. In fact, this incident is what got me off my butt, where I had been doing nothing but sitting and complaining. We never really know who our teachers are until we look back on life. And I never thought my life would start again like new when I looked up from that hard wooden table and saw that I was joining Dogman for a picnic. Coy Ryan, I ain't lying, 'cause of them we're all still flying. Please welcome our newest channel member, Coy Ryan, to the fold. Did you know that you can join for as little as $1 a month and get to see our weekly secret uncensored episodes? Well, it's true. You get more perks at higher levels, of course. Speaking of which, I want to let you guys know that I got this message from YouTube saying I can add another level to the channel memberships. I was gonna choose $25, but it kept sending me an error message. I think they want me to go $49 or $99. I'm also supposed to be able to give you special icons for staying members longer and stuff like that, but none of it has been working for me so far. Hopefully it'll sort itself out and we may have news about that soon. Henry will be along at the very end of the show with important deets about how you can become an executive producer. But now let's jump into our next story, which is called My Girlfriend Left Me for a Werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC. First of all, I want to say that I don't own any silver bullets or anything like that. I'm not some lunatic out to avenge myself on a guy who stole my girlfriend. When I tell you that this guy is some kind of werewolf or dog-headed man, I'm not being insulting or hyperbolic. I mean, he literally is a hairy, dog-faced monster that many might classify as a cryptid. Well, maybe some of the beings that look like this are cryptids, but I want you to know that some dogmen that people report are actually human beings, such as the one who stole my girlfriend. I'm going to try and explain how I can know that, even though I can't honestly say that I fully understand this situation. I just know that my girlfriend left me for one of these things, but the thing she left me for was definitely 100% some kind of a human being. It was not just some animal. For this reason, I call it a werewolf, even though I have not yet been able to find anyone who can tell me that they've seen this creature man transform. Either he is some kind of different species of human, or he's a man who transforms into his dogman form, or he's some kind of wizard or advanced scientist who can somehow, either through hypnotism or holography, create the illusion or impression that he is some form of traditional werewolf or dogman. My girlfriend was not the type to want to live cheap, so this dogman must have had access to a source of wealth. That's all I'm saying. He could not be just some beast picking fleas off himself. That's just not Melba's type. If I seem a bit frantic, it's because I am. I went to see a shrink. Well, not a real shrink, just a therapist. That's what they call a shrink for working class people. Therapists don't cost as much, and they don't have the power to have you committed. So, as a person claiming that my girlfriend left me for a werewolf, I feel safer with a therapist than with an actual shrinkologist. Think about it. You would too. Anyway, my therapist said that I feel as though I've lost my whole world because my girlfriend left me, and that's because my girlfriend had been my entire world until she left. So the therapist said that proves that I'm sane, even if it feels like the opposite. Now all I had to do was make myself my world or some nonsense like that. Well, her argument started off strong. None of that is actually the point anyway. The point is that werewolves are real, or at least whatever that guy is real. I don't know what he is, but I know he had a dog's head and a man's chest, and he was covered in fur instead of clothing. See, that's a big part of it. Melba used to be really mean when she would criticize my wardrobe. She never held back on the cruel jokes. about how I wouldn't know fashion if it came up to me and clothed me. I don't even know what that joke is supposed to mean. I just know that she'd cackle like a chicken each time she said it. She would constantly belittle me, then say she was only teasing. I've been teased before, and it was not like what she did. Also, I always felt like I had to watch my mouth around her. She would tell me that I was toxic whenever I had my own ideas about things. And she would tell me my opinions were problematic. Finally, I asked her to define problematic, and she seemed to think it meant out of fashion. I suppose it has come to mean that, hasn't it? And that's what I became in her life, the second she saw that nasty dog-headed wolfman. It happened pretty fast, the complete change in my life. I had gotten sick of Melba, and I needed space, but I was too afraid to say anything like that to her. She had my self-esteem so low that I was thinking our relationship problems were my fault. I decided I'd go camping for 2 weeks alone, and each day leading up to it, I yearned for the freedom of the woods. But as miserable as I wasn't thinking about leaving her. I just wanted some space so I could fix my head and go back to live with her. Then, a few days before I was set to leave, Melba started quizzing me about what kind of tent we were going to be camping in. My stomach sank. I didn't want any conflict with her, so I consented to buying a new tent and new sleeping bags and other expensive stuff that I never wanted to buy. So now I had wasted a ton of money for the privilege of bringing along the person I most needed space from. Well, as it turned out, I got my wish in the end, didn't I? So our first day of camping was a nightmare, with me being ordered around and insulted. Day 2 started with a bad breakfast and was followed by Melba announcing that she was going for a walk in the woods, alone. She acted like this was a punishment, but honestly I was hoping she'd stay out all day. In fact, it was hours before she returned, shouting to me from the woodline that I'd never believe who she ran into in the forest. Oh great, it was probably someone else who would insult me and pick on me. Half her friends were just as condescending as Melba was. I rose and walked against my will over to the tree line to see who I had to pretend to be polite to this time. Well, with my gaze held downward in depression, I saw Melba's feet first, and they were standing next to... What were they standing next to exactly? I stopped walking and lifted my head. Melba was standing next to some kind of a monster. It was shaped mostly like a man, but it had to have been just under 8 feet tall. Its legs were oddly shaped. My first thought was that they were goat legs, which is an odd thing to think, since I had seen the feet first, and the feet were clawed paws, like hind legs that a dog or a cat might have. The creature took a step forward, holding out a huge clawed paw that looked more like a hand, to be honest. Each claw on that hand was long enough to slice my throat or my belly open. I stared at the huge thing, afraid to move a muscle. "He's offering you his paw," Melba taunted. "Aren't you at least gonna shake his hand?" She cackled without waiting for an answer. He wanted me to shake his hand. So, was he intelligent? Was he a man? Or was he an animal trained to hold out his paw? If so, what kind of animal was he? I backed away from this nightmare slowly, and when I saw that neither of them were following me, I ran back to the tent. I heard Melba laugh as I ran. Inside, I lay awake for a long time, wondering what they were doing out there, wondering what that thing was. Eventually I fell asleep and I woke up, thinking that it had all been a dream. But I never saw Melba again. Oh, don't worry, she wasn't killed or eaten by the beast man. She sends me taunting postcards from various locations that I never knew werewolves liked to frequent. I mean, it has to be a werewolf of some kind or another, because how could she write me from Florida, New York, and Austin? They don't allow dogmen in large cities, but they would have to allow werewolves, as long as they were in their human form. That to me is the proof much more than the handshake, that this was not a dogman that she left me for. The other thing that keeps coming back to me in dreams was the way she called me over to the woodline, saying I wouldn't believe who she ran into. That implies that it was someone we both knew already. Or at least, she seemed to be saying it was someone she knew, who I must have heard of at minimum. Someone I would at least know by name and reputation. My main guess is that it was one of the many boyfriends she had prior to me. She would tell me all about them all the time, but my mind would drift off when she did. I think I would focus on the clouds in the sky, or trying to remember old song lyrics whenever she launched into one of her long, boring stories about one of her ex-boyfriends. So maybe it was somebody that she had told me about when I wasn't paying attention one day. At any rate, I'm pretty certain that she knew who that guy was when he didn't look like a dogman. Which means he might have been a shapeshifter. Either that, or else maybe he was like the Shadow from the old radio shows, able to cloud men's minds so that they thought they were looking at a dogman. I mean, I can't exclude the idea of holographic projection, since I am including wild concepts here. I know for a fact that this guy has to be well off. Just judging by the amount of traveling, their postcards seem to indicate that they do. So the richer he might be, the more likely it could become that he might have some kind of tech that he could use to make himself like an avatar in a video game. Honestly, if that dogman was an avatar, he came equipped with an animal scent when he appeared. That's another thing. If he hypnotized me into seeing him as a dogman, could he also hypnotize me to smell that wet canine odor too? I mean, I keep coming back around to the idea that the thing that held out its hand or paw to shake was a physical, real, living being. And he was actually there. I didn't touch him, but he gave me the chance to. So how do you explain it? I know I can't. It's been over a month now and I still wake up in the middle of the night, upset about this, like it just happened. It's like she was kidnapped from me, but she collaborated in the kidnapping, laughing at me the entire way. She still refuses to even tell me who she's run off with, because she enjoys how upset she's made me. I'm glad I've chosen to write this down to send you because, as I write it out, I can see how bad she was to me and for me. I'm upset because she wants me to be upset. She must have figured out that I wanted space from her, so now she's figured out a way for me to get what I wanted, and for it to hurt worse than it did when she was still around. Did any of you get the license plate number of the truck that hit me? Because I've been feeling like the world has ended, ever since. My girlfriend left me for a werewolf. I closed my eyes and I made a wisha. Then back to our channel members came Patricia. Please join me in welcoming once and future channel member Patricia Taggart for making this episode possible. Did you know that you can join our channel members for as little as 99 cents a month? Well, Patricia knows. And now she gets to see our weekly Sunday uncensored stories, like the newest one that just came out today. Our newest uncensored story that Patricia will get to enjoy is called My Sister Got After the Dogman Actor. I can't even say the name here, but you can hear the entire story uncensored on our secret channel, either by signing up to our PayPal club at peterbernard.com or by joining our channel members by clicking that join button under each of our videos. Henry will be along at the very end of the show with important deets about how you can become an executive producer. But now let's jump into our next story, which is called Dogman Entered the Shack, then Disappeared. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Hey, check out this Google Street View and see if you can tell me what state I'm in, okay? This is right near where I had a truly weird dogman encounter. It was not on this water, but further back in the woods in this same area. So where do you think it is? It looks like a lake, but, it's not the Great Lakes region. Can you guess? Looks a bit swampy, but it's not Louisiana. Got any other guesses? Well, I'll tell you where this is. Ready? This is in Weird, New Jersey. Specifically, I'm by Oswego Lake, just to the southwest of the Pine Barrens National Reserve, legendary home of the Jersey Devil. This is not a Jersey Devil story, though. This one is about me, my friend, and the Dogman. Oswego Lake is also southwest of Penn State Forest, which of course is not in Pennsylvania State, it's in New Jersey, so I don't even know why they call it that. You could sort of break New Jersey into two parts. There's the suburb of New York City, which is to the west of Manhattan and features Hoboken and Jersey City and suburbs further out. Then there's South Jersey, with a lot of nightlife on the East Coast, suburbs of Pennsylvania on the western edge, and a center filled with a lot of undeveloped natural land for monsters to breed on, and mobsters to bury their... well, let's skip over that part of it. There's a whole lot of nature inland over there, and there is where our story happened. So I was spending 3 weeks in the middle of the summer that year, camping with my buddy Randall. We would find a good spot near a source of clear water, then stay until something happened to give us a reason to move. Like one night, we heard little explosions in the distance. We couldn't tell if they were firecrackers or maybe something a lot more dangerous. So we moved on from that spot as soon as the sun came up. One day we were hiking randomly on land that we thought was national parkland when we came across this beat-up old rusted tin shack. It didn't look like government property. It looked like some place that a really poor old guy lived in. Lived as in past tense. The place seemed old as a dinosaur, or maybe even a member of Congress. We were both afraid of it in a strange way. Either we were on someone's private land by accident, in which case we might get in trouble or even shot as trespassers, or else that shack really shouldn't even be there, in which case any number of things might be going on inside. We were both frightened and fascinated at the same time. We were afraid to get closer, yet we couldn't look away. And then something happened that made that enigmatic and oddly located old shack seem boring in comparison. At the point where the sun had started to go down and the lighting got sort of orange, a big hairy caveman with a dog head walked casually and quietly out of the surrounding woods. We were sure happy that we had hidden ourselves when this beast man arrived, believe me. This was not only an upright canine that walked on its hind legs, but this one's front legs looked more like the arms of a human boxer than a canine one. Only they didn't end in dog paws or boxer's gloves. They ended in these strangely long paws with dew claws located where they could function similarly to thumbs. This was more like a man than a dog in a lot of ways, but I don't think it had any human DNA. I think it was a kind of canine, but one that evolved differently and ended up becoming superficially a lot like human beings. This creature was darkly colored, but not like a black bear. It had dark gray fur. I don't think any kind of bear is colored like that. And no bear ever had a snout so long. It was almost closer to being an alligator snout than a bear snout. This was some creature not unlike a wolf, only it stood up and walked around. I know for a fact that it had an opposable thumb because I saw it walk up to the door of that metal shack and open it with his hand. Then he walked inside, and there came a lot of noise as though things were being banged around in there. We watched, breathless, waiting to see and hear what would happen next. Nothing did. We waited a while longer until it got dark enough that we were going to have to rush to find a spot to set up camp for that night. We split, but we came back right after breakfast the next morning. Cautiously approaching the tiny ramshackle construction, we could see no signs of life. We hid and threw pebbles at the tiny box, but nothing happened in response. Finally, we got up and walked over to peek inside and see what was going on. There wasn't anything going on, as it turned out. We went inside and rummaged around in the mess inside there. There was a big, heavy wooden table with only 3 out of its 4 legs still intact, and it lay upside down on top of a rug, filling up most of the center of the room. Around that was a single wooden chair and some shelves on which sat tin cans and a hot plate, among some other personal items. This place did seem to have been lived in fairly recently. There was dust, but there wasn't years' worth of it. We started checking the dates on the cans, and some of the food was still good. We looked for stuff we liked while we debated whether someone was still living there or not. After all, if nobody was living there, then it wouldn't really be stealing to take these cans, would it? So I can't really even begin to explain how fast this next thing happened. Maybe the best way to demonstrate how quickly and drastically this situation changed would be to do what they used to do on the $6 Million Man show back in the 20th century, to show that he was running at super speed. And what they did back then was to crank things down to slow motion in the high-speed scenes. The table was upside down on the rug, as I said, and there was barely room to maneuver around it. The shack was not really large enough for two of us. And then, all in the next 1 or 2 seconds, all of these following things happened. First, my feet slid out backward from under me, as the rug was literally pulled out behind me. I had no idea who had done that, since I could see where Randall was as I fell, and he was not in a position to do such a thing. My face made both a slapping and a cracking sound as I slammed head first into first the shelving, and then into the rotting wooden floor. It did not knock me out or anything like that, but my face hurt so much that I was pretty much blind for a while after that. The rest of this is how Randall told me it went down from there. He said he watched that table stand up on one end, and at first he thought it was possessed or something. It looked like it had reared up under its own power, but in the next instant, Randall saw the table tipping over extremely quickly, and all that heavy wood was about to slam into nearly every part of his body at once. Trying to dive out of the way, Randall did succeed in keeping his upper torso from getting slammed, but the table hit him right in his family jewels. And oh, did they ring out into the night. Dazed and in as much pain as I was in, Randall said he looked past the table and he saw a big hole in the floor of the shack. It looked like a trap door, and the table had been lying upside down on top of it. He also told me he saw who had opened that door and tipped that table over. It was the Dogman. It was either that same Dogman, or else it was another of that same species or breed. When the Dogman saw him, Randall said the beast grabbed him by both his shoulders at once and lifted him right up off the ground. Randall pretended to faint, which seemed to disgust the 9 or 10 foot tall monstrosity. He let Randall drop to the floor, where he banged his ankle up pretty bad. Even so, he had to make sure not to cry out in pain and pretend to still be unconscious. Otherwise that Dogman would come back and give him a real reason to cry. So that thing squeezed its massive form out through the door. We were both seriously messed up, and we got out of there to hike to a ranger station. It took a few hours to get us bandaged and cleaned up, and then the ranger wanted us to take him back and show him the illegally built tin shack. When we got there, he saw some bits and pieces of the shack, but the majority of it was entirely missing from the scene. Where the trapdoor had been, a thick metal plate, larger than the shack had been, was embedded firmly down into the dirt. It looked like a week of work had been done on the location, but we had been away less than 5 hours. So, who did all that work? And how many men did it take to get it done that quickly? I bounced up and down on top of the metal plate, expecting to hear a hollow sound, since it had to be above that former trapdoor. That rusted old plate was so thick and so solid that it didn't even give enough to let me know if there was a cavity beneath or if the hole had all been filled in. So the sheriff was polite but skeptical when we told him that someone had obviously dismantled the shack and moved it all away. He acted like we had been yanking his crank and wasting his time, but as I said, he remained polite. We had just told the truth and done nothing wrong, but he was making us feel guilty, so we just gave up and split out of there. I'm going to give you some advice I learned the hard way. Don't be so curious. Don't be so quick to want to investigate. If you just looked up to see that Dogman entered the shack then disappeared. Hey guys, we got an extra bonus story for you today. It's a really weird one, and it's short, so I hope you'll give it a chance and check it out. It's about the Dogman, even though the Dogman isn't exactly in it. Or is he? This is so strange that I hope you watch it and leave your thoughts below about it. And we call this one Hands Growing Out of the Ground. Dear Scary Stories NYC, ever since I was a little kid, I've been getting told stories from my mom and older relatives about a dogman who likes to kill and eat bad little kids. Usually, I was told that he lived in the forest just behind our house, but he was sort of a universal dogman who could abduct kids from all over the world if they misbehaved their parents. It's sort of a legend like Krampus, I guess, only you could tell it to scare your kids all year round, not just at Christmas. If you were bad, you were told that the dogman was going to come into your room and take you away in the middle of the night. You would get dragged out to the killing tree, where the dogman would make a fine meal of you, then bury what was left on the ground in and amongst the killing tree's roots. I had no actual idea where the killing tree was, but at the same time, I had little doubt that it was in those woods directly behind the house that we rented throughout my entire childhood. I was so certain it was there that I never even got up the courage to go look for it. As a kid, I was more afraid of the dogman than anything else, so I stayed away from any location that the dogman was alleged to have been seen at. The stories were designed to frighten kids into obedience, and that sure worked well with a little chicken like me. There was something that happened when I was 19 years old, though, that I'd mostly blocked out of my mind until recently. I was listening to a playlist of your longer episodes, and I fell asleep with your stories still going in my earbuds. It shouldn't be surprising that I dreamed about Dogman all night. When I was waking up, though, I was remembering something that was not from a dream. It was a memory from my real life back some time ago. I was remembering this event from when I was 19, that I'd sort of hidden away in my mind for so long. I was with one of my earlier girlfriends. I forget if she was the third or the fourth. I ran through them like toilet paper until I finally moved out on my own, about 10 months or a year after this happened. I was technically a young adult at age 19, but I was living with mom and dad, and still thinking the way a kid thinks. Everything was still a game to me, at least for a few months longer. The girlfriend and I wanted to find ourselves some privacy, so we wandered off into that forest behind the house that I was telling you about before. I no longer believed in those old dogman stories. In fact, I wasn't even thinking about them or cryptids in any sense when I walked hand in hand with that girl into those woods on that afternoon. I hadn't forgotten about all that, but it was now filed in my brain in the same place that I filed Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, if you know what I mean. So I had no fear entering those woods, only anticipation of getting to be alone with my new flavor of the month girlfriend. I don't say that to disrespect her, but rather to mock my younger self. I mean, to be honest, I don't even remember for sure which one of them I had with me that day. My main memory in all of this is what happened next. We got to a tree set off from the rest, with a circle of grass and dirt surrounding it. I felt myself shivering as though it had just gotten cold, but I was simultaneously sweating from the afternoon heat. Something had caused that shiver, but it wasn't a breeze. There wasn't a strong enough breeze to make something like that happen. I saw the hair on my arms stand on end, even as sweat dripped from that same arm. Explain that to me. The girlfriend was fine. In fact, she was skipping and dancing around. My eyes fell on a truly horrific sight in the same moment that the girl pointed at what I was looking at and began chattering about it. To her, this was just something really weird and funny looking. But to me, it was a traumatic event. I felt like someone had just punched me in the belly and knocked all the hot air out of me for a minute. Suddenly, I wasn't a young man leading his woman into the woods. Suddenly, I was back to being a young, superstitious boy, too afraid to be where I was in those woods. So what caused me to seize up like that? Dude, I took a picture of it. Look at these hands reaching up out of the ground at the bottom of that tree. If you look closely, you'll see that it's the roots of the tree, forming itself into a natural horror movie scene somehow. I knew that I was looking at the killing tree of the Dogman from those childhood stories. Those arms reaching up were created by those roots, intertwining with the souls of young people who had misbehaved and gotten removed from their homes by the Dogman over the years. I knew those were roots. I knew they weren't actual hands. And yet, I also knew they were very much the results of the actions of the Dogman. I don't know or care if my parents were intentionally telling me the truth, or if this creature is a tulpa resulting from people imagining that Dogman into real life by retelling his stories. In either case, it may as well be considered as real as you or me. The girlfriend walked over to some of those hands, and she reached it down to touch fingers with one of them. "Stop!" I screamed. "Don't touch that thing!" She backed away, looking at me, then the root, then me, as though she didn't know which of the two of us she was more afraid of. She asked me why she shouldn't touch it, and I realized what it would sound like if I told her that I felt those were the spirits of bad children, punished by a dog-headed beast man of legend and lore. Instead, I just made up some story about the roots of that tree being like poison ivy. I said if she touched it, she might get an itchy rash. She continued, looking at me, then the root, then me. I needed to get out of there. I sort of wasn't feeling romantic or frisky any longer, if you know what I mean. I can't remember what happened from then on with that particular girl, but I remember that I started to change after that day. I had gone back to being as scared of the Dogman as I was when I was really young, but slowly it dawned on me that I was now an adult. If I didn't feel safe in a situation, I was perfectly free to go get a job, save up some money, and move out. It's not like my parents were going to object to having one less mouth to feed, so it really was all up to me. Instead of cowering in fear, I used that fear as a motivator, and I worked and saved, and, well, basically then my parents matched my savings so that I had enough to move out. I probably would have still been there, but thankfully Mom and Dad helped, and once I left, I never returned. I never really did go on to become much of a success of any kind, but at least I never moved back in with my parents, so I got that going for me. And the thing I realized after falling asleep listening to your show and dreaming all night about the Dogman was that it's always been the Dogman who has motivated me. When I was a kid, I did my chores and got the best grades I could. Why? So that my parents wouldn't hand me over to the Dogman, that's why. The reason I finally moved out of my parents' home when I was 20 was, once again, fear of the Dogman. Is fear the only motivating force in my life? That's kind of the question I've been asking myself ever since the day when I saw hands growing out of the ground. Want the best executive producer that you're ever gonna get? Then look no further than Sheila Paulette. Please join us in thanking today's executive producer, Sheila Paulette Garner-Roberts, for making this episode possible. Sheila is a channel member and supports us that way, but she also leaves us some of the nicest comments we ever get. So even if you can't afford to join one of our clubs or donate to us, we still appreciate encouraging comments, we really do. Right now, it's just hard to survive without our channel members and PayPal Club members. Henry will be along at the very end of the show with important deets about how you can become an executive producer. But now let's jump into our next story, which is called Dogman All-American Cryptid Monster. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a July 4th Dogman story for you if you have any use for something like that. This happened last year, but it's already an epic and important family legend to us. We mostly survive the same way we have for generations, which is off our family farm. We certainly aren't rich, and we do take on other paying work, but most of the food we eat is either grown here or else is bought with the cash we earn selling milk, eggs, and butter. When we have a surplus of crops, we'll sell those off also, but that hasn't happened for a long while. Since we lost our daddy, who was born on July 4th, overseas in a conflict that you probably don't even remember any longer, things have been a lot harder for my family. I didn't say they were desperate, just harder. We're sending my younger brother to college for engineering, which is a subject that he's got some natural ability in. The income an engineer can pull in would make life much easier for all of us, but we wouldn't be talking about any of this if it weren't for the Dogman. The Dogman is the only reason we still even have this farm. You see, back in 2021, a lot of land and homes started getting bought up by some of the wealthiest companies in the world. They would pay any price just to remove home ownership from the future of the American landscape, according to some who tied this movement with a certain anti-populism movement emerging out of Davos. They're just patriotic companies investing in the American future, say their defenders. All I know is, the day before we got visited by one of these wealthy companies, we got a call from an old family friend who works at the only real estate company in this part of the state. He warned us that we were about to be strong-armed out of our family farm and property, and that there really wasn't going to be much that we could do about it. We would get more than our property was worth, but our property wasn't worth enough for us to buy a new home, even a smaller one. Without the land and the animals, we'd have to get jobs to eat. The money we'd earn from the sale would cover an apartment for a while, but not for all that long. No matter how you looked at it, we were facing a family crisis, and most likely, our family's final crisis. We were going to have to split up to survive, and we were going to have to each fend for ourselves. This wasn't easy to take, but we didn't have much of a choice in the matter. The family gathered around, and we started talking about the old days. My younger brother expressed disbelief that anyone would want our land so badly. He started listing all the things we needed to fix but couldn't afford to. He started talking about the shortcomings in the land itself. And then, the conversation shifted to the Dogman. Why would anyone want to buy a crappy old farm that the Dogman continues to visit, he asked. Every year, the Dogman shows up to steal a chicken, or maybe some eggs. This happens at least once a year, sometimes twice. We were grateful he seemed to do it that infrequently. I suppose he didn't want to put us out of business. I got the impression that he only stole from us when the pickings were mighty lean out there in the woods for his predator self. We weren't like some people who hang food out for the Dogman, but we accepted that we were going to lose a certain amount of food and profits each year because of him. That didn't mean we were happy to see him, but we accepted him as another thing that we just had to deal with. There was one time my sister, I'll call Eleanor, came face to face with the Dogman. That was pretty bad, but obviously it could have turned out much worse. That was when my dad was still alive and living here with us. Eleanor took the garbage out that night, put it in a can, and when she turned to walk back to the farmhouse, she had to stop short before she walked bam right into a North American upright walking canine. For real. This was not in 2021, I'd guess more like 2014. Not so long ago that I can't still remember it like it happened last night. Now, this particular Dogman was a big brown one. Around here you'll see gray ones, black ones, and the biggest of them are the brown ones. Like I said before, it's usually one or two a year, and you never know which kind it's going to be, or what season they'll show up in. The Dogman likes to catch you off guard. You should expect him to show up when you aren't expecting him to show up. Eleanor said she looked up and that big old dog head was drooling on her from twice her height up in the air. She said the creature smelled like this teacher at our school from when we were younger, who always smelled like pee all the time. She figured she was a goner and just hoped it would be over quick. But out of nowhere, from behind her, a shovel came down, swinging at that dogman's drooling, ugly old head. Eleanor snuck out of there once she realized she was sandwiched between the monster and our dad. The dogman wasn't able to get close enough to my father to snap at him or to swipe at him because that shovel was waving around in his face too fast and too much. Eventually, the creature just ran off back into the woods. What would Eleanor have done if that happened after our dad went overseas? What were any of us gonna do without him? So, as predicted, the men showed up on July 4th to bully us out of our land. They chose a national holiday created to commemorate freedom to come take our land away from us. They could have waited a day or two, but somehow they knew to come on our dad's birthday. They knew to come on Independence Day. Evil always knows without even knowing. Evil always finds a way to make the hard parts of life hurt even worse. So we greeted the men and we acted friendly. We gave them food, and we gave them homemade gin that we had traded with one of the neighbors for. The two men were feeling pretty comfortable, and they didn't even notice that it had gotten dark out until one of them rose to stagger to the bathroom. We heard him screaming in there before the door burst open, and he ran out, trying to pull his pants up as he leaped into the hallway. Instead, he tripped over his own pants and slammed his head hard into our short wooden bookcase as he fell. We all had the same reaction, which was to look at each other like, what just happened? Nobody thought to go to the guy who just slammed face first into the carpet to see if he was all right. His partner didn't care about him any more than we did. And since he was there to take our home away from us, we didn't care about him in the slightest. Instead, we all walked over his prone form and into the bathroom, looking out the windows to see what had scared him so much. The other creepy real estate guy was in front of us, until he turned around and barreled into us. We all fell backward out into the hallway, and I have to say, we wanted to know why. It had a dog's head, the guy screamed like a lunatic. It was a man with a dog's head, he shouted. Grabbing me by the shoulders, the man angrily accused me of trying to sell off land that has a monster on it. One monster, I asked him. We probably got a lot more than one. When he demanded to know what I meant by that, I told him what I already told you, that we see these things usually once or twice a year. Well, that big greedy fool woke up his drunken friend, and the two of them beat it out of our farmhouse. That was the end of their interest in our part of the country, too, at least for now. Maybe in a few years they'll force us all into the pods to eat the bugs, but for now, they seem to think it's fine just to let us keep on living on Dogman-infested lands. So now you see what I meant when I said that the Dogman was the only reason we still own this property. It's because he came to save us on our late father's birthday. I'm not saying that we're happy to be living with a species of man-eating predators making their way through our land every year, but it sure beats the alternative of losing our generational home. In spite of all that, though, I can't deny that we feel a great affection and kinship with the Dogman since that day when he saved our home. I don't suppose he knew what he was doing when he peeked in that bathroom window at that evil real estate fool, but we thank him anyway. To us, he's the Dogman All-American Cryptid Monster. Hey, check this out. You can wear this t-shirt of today's thumbnail. Let everyone know that you are an all-American monster. Find the link in this video's description and use the discount code FREEDOM to get a whopping 40% off, but only on July 4th, 2022. On July 5th, the sale's over. Use the code on anything in our merch store if it strikes your fancy. If you're a regular viewer, then you might remember me telling you how ad revenue's way down, for our channel at least. Now even YouTube is admitting it. In June, we had more views, more hours watched, and more subscribers than in the month before, but we earned less to live off of and to keep the channel going with. You can see right there what they're telling me. Fewer high-paying ads were placed on my videos. That's because fewer were bought overall, and they're gonna save those for the top channels. Advertisers have to cut back due to inflation, same as the rest of us. So, YouTube wants us to sell stuff and beg for donations from you guys, even though you're in the same situation as the advertisers are and this channel is. Kind of a scary time, but I hope you forgive me for continuing to try. It's the only way I can think of to keep the channel online right now. I suppose I have to also expand to more platforms and do a new audio version of the show. I think we're already on Rumble, but I have to go back to expanding. I don't suppose I have any more choice though at this point. It's likely to get far worse before it starts to get better. On that cheery note, I'd like to wish you all a happy Independence Day. If you're considering joining our PayPal or channel membership clubs, today's secret uncensored story is called My Brother Dogman with His I can't even say the name here, but I can tell the entire tale on our secret channel, which you can join for as little as 99 cents a month or $1.50 I believe it is on the PayPal club. Henry will be along at the very end of the show with important deets about how you can become an executive producer. But now let's jump into our next story, which is called We Were Chased Off by a Dogman Gang. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I went hiking and camping with my friend Pugsley, and I think we were systematically harassed and run off by a group or pack of dogmen. Yet the way everything went down, it left us unsure as to what really even happened. It always seems as if the dogman understands human culture well enough to only interfere in our world just enough to stake out their turf, and not enough so that the larger human culture begins to see the dogman as a problem. As long as they can keep most people skeptical about their existence, the dogman can get away with a lot more. But how could they know this if they're just wild predatorial animals? On this trip we had multiple encounters with these creepy creatures, not just one. Settle in and hold on to your hat. This is going to get both windy and bumpy. So we were hiking toward the general area we intended to camp in, along the Pinnacle Trail. You can get pretty high up in the air over there, and in certain places you do have to be a little careful about sticking to the path and not falling over the edge. As we came to one such area, this big, tall, hairy man wearing no clothing leaped out sideways from a patch of woods and elbowed my hiking buddy Calvin, sending him off balance to the edge of the cliff. As the big hairy monster man turned to race away from this hit and run, I got to see his face for a second. It was only a second, but it was a clear, unobstructed view. It resembled the monster on a lot of your thumbnails, the long-snouted snaggletooth one. It ran like an Olympic sprinter, but its feet looked more like dog legs than they looked like a man's. It never looked back at Calvin. It just raced off to its next appointment. I'm not really sure how tall it was, but it was bigger than any man I'd ever seen. It looked young and athletic, not overly muscle-bound, and yet I bet it weighed more than any human male that ever lived. Calvin grabbed hold of some rocks on the edge of the precipice, and I was able to pull him back up on the path. Neither of us could figure out if the dogman had run out just then in order to knock my friend off the cliff to his inevitable demise, or if he just happened to be running there and only ran into Calvin by chance. It's sort of a very different story, one way or the other, and we were very curious as to which one was true. Did we randomly run into a random werewolf running randomly, or was someone trying to send us a message that we might not be welcome in that area? Now, where we were is an area set aside for tourists and hikers, and it's used by a very large number of people annually. We both decided right there on the spot that if there was a dogman or a werewolf scaring people away from this very popular site, then we probably would have heard about it already. Either that, or the park would have cleaned it up or closed it down. Instead of being upset about it, we decided we should be happy and grateful. After all, we just got to see a werewolf or dogman, and how many people can say that? As our nerves settled, we decided that it was a one-time only random occurrence, and that we'd better get going if we were going to reach our intended camping area in time to get set up before dark. And that is what we did with some extra time to spare. After pitching the tent, we decided to walk around looking for dry wood to build a campfire with. At one point, we were walking along a road over there on the side of one of the hills. We were finding a lot of branches which had fallen and rolled down the hill a long time ago, which were quite dried out. At one point, though, a rain of rocks, sized from pebbles to golf balls, came raining down the side of the steep forested hill, landing on top of the two of us. We ran out into the middle of the road and looked upward. There, up on the hill and climbing rapidly away from us, were two large upright canines, easily the same size or taller than the one who had pushed Calvin over. We only saw them for a few seconds as they retreated upward and away, but that was enough to put us both back in a very unhappy and uncomfortable state of mind. Once again, we were left asking, was this a random occurrence? Were they minding their own business, or had they been spying on me and Calvin? The rocks that fell on us, were they sent cascading down the hill deliberately, intending to hit us? Or was it the result of them climbing away and accidentally setting loose a lot of loose dirt and stone? Whether they intended to bother us or not, these dogmen were getting us very upset. We decided to skip making a fire. We'd eat our trail mix for dinner, and we'd share the same tent in case we were attacked. Since then, I've spoken with others who said we should have kept the campfire going all night and taken turns watching out for the dogman. We didn't know that the campfire would keep them at a distance. We thought it would only signal everybody in that part of the planet about where we were camping. So live and learn, and I'm glad we lived through what was about to happen next. We decided to go right to sleep so that we could get out of the area as soon as the sun came up in the morning. It seemed like a good plan, but soon we were hearing voices out in the night. They weren't speaking to us. They were saying things to each other. We listened as hard as we could, and although we were certain we were hearing voices, we couldn't tell what they were saying. Maybe it was a language we didn't recognize, I'm not sure. But at the time, we both felt almost positive that we were listening to the dogmen talking to other dogmen. Since then, a friend of Calvin's suggested to him that maybe the dogmen weren't saying anything at all. Maybe they were just imitating or making fun of what people sound like to them when we talk. Maybe they were trying to get us to come out of the tent by making noises that they might have thought of as human calls, how we do a duck call? Maybe the dogman can do a human call. I feel like it was the dogman, although I don't know what it really meant. Maybe they were strategizing with each other, or maybe they really were trying to draw us out of our tent. At some point the sounds seemed to stop and I fell asleep. When I woke up suddenly a while later, Calvin was screaming out in pain and surprise while I couldn't shout, since I had just had all the wind knocked out of me by what I thought was a tree falling on our tent. I remember when I got my breath back, I asked Calvin if he had any serious injuries, because I didn't seem to. It forced him to stop screaming like a lunatic and start thinking like a human. We were both bruised, but nothing was broken, and we both agreed it was time to leave. We had been sleeping with our boots on for this exact kind of a reason. It was dark out, and it's always stupid to hike while it's dark, even if you're hiking on flat land, which we were not. It was suicide to leave before the sun, but we just had a tree dropped on us as far as we knew, and we both felt safer leaving than staying, even though both options felt unintelligent and suicidal. When we were able to climb out of the ruined tent, we could see that it was not in fact a tree which had fallen upon us. It was a very large branch, bigger and heavier than some entire trees, and that was what had fallen upon us. We were camping in a clearing, though. We looked up. There was no tree above us. So where did it fall from? The moon? Man, of all the chills I got this entire day and night, I have to say that was the one that gave me the worst goosebumps. I mean, maybe that big old 300-pound branch hadn't fallen at all. Maybe something just tossed it on top of us. Maybe that's why we both weren't crushed to death. Maybe the thing was just lobbed on top. Maybe the intent was not to leave us deceased, but to get us to wake up and go away from this area. I prayed that was what was going on, because if that was the case, then we might be allowed by the Dogman clan to leave. Maybe if they saw us leaving, they might ease up and let us focus all our concentration on not getting ourselves hurt, or worse, in the pitch darkness. That was what I hoped for anyway. So we began the long trudge back, less weighed down because of all that we had to leave behind back at the camp. I could hear things moving in the woods to our left for a while, and then to our right after that. It always sounded like someone was behind us as well, but each time I would turn around, I would see nothing there. We came upon the ledge where the Dogman had almost knocked Calvin, falling to his doom, and I have to say, we both needed a break to work our courage back up enough to proceed. Neither of us wanted to pass that way again, but we had to in order to return to the human world, basically. We held our weapons at the ready, and we walked the gauntlet, watching the woods intently, listening for any sound at all from inside those dark trees. I was sweating so much I almost couldn't hold my weapon, but we made it through safely, and we didn't hear anyone following us anymore after that. Even though I lived through this, I can't imagine the Dogman claimed turf on this part of the park. Maybe it was like festival time for their people or something. Maybe they needed that space for some personal reason that night. They couldn't possibly treat hikers like that very often, or the place would be famous for this kind of thing. Whenever I hear podcasts with people theorizing about the Dogman, I try to always listen. I'm willing to entertain all theories right now, because I'm so thoroughly mystified by that species and their culture, because I do think that's what we were observing, cooperation and culture being exhibited by a non-human species. And since Calvin and I were unprepared to make first contact with another species on that day, we were chased off by a Dogman gang. Welcome. So I was looking through an old hard drive for a PDF of my Scary Stories book, which I was thinking of reading from, when I found this old episode that was either lost in the adpocalypse or the duplication apocalypse. The first story of these two is a Dogman story that I don't think we currently have online, although I suppose I could be wrong about that. The second story was originally a two-parter, but I've edited it back into one story here. In some places I'm leaving the original visuals, in other places I've been forced to change the images for various reasons. So without further ado, here's a Dogman tale from 2018, performed by the combination of PQ Ribber and Patricia Hodegi, and we call this one
Dogman and Disembodied Voice Encounter, as told to Peter Bernard. Read by PQ Ribber. I've been reading about Dogman online recently because I want to understand an encounter. I think I met this cryptid face to face, but this story is so strange and so different from other Dogman stories I hear online. Maybe what I saw was something else. Maybe someone hearing this story will know better than I did what happened to me. All I know for certain is that when the weird phenomena all started, it was as far away from a Dogman encounter as possible. It seemed, at first, I was being haunted. Let me start at the beginning, so that this makes more sense. A little while back, the company I worked for decided to relocate my whole department, which meant a promotion and a raise for me, but also meant I'd have to find a new home. I wanted a place that reflected my new, better position at the company, but I really didn't have the savings to get that kind of a house yet. I ended up finding a small but stately little 2-story, 2-bedroom, old-fashioned shingled house a bit out of town, the edge of a forest. It's basically inside the forest, really, and there are no other houses on the block. I was surprised to find it for rent at such a price. And the lease, just pay month to month. That was great for me, because I hope to be able to afford something closer to town in half a year or so. Even though it was in such a rural location, the little house had an ornate chandelier downstairs, a fireplace, and a beautiful staircase leading up to the bedrooms. Each of the bedrooms had fireplaces too, but they looked as though they had been sealed up years earlier. There was central heating. The place had been kept up well, yet still looked old. Everything seemed original if it wasn't actually. It was not what you would expect to find out here, so I guessed it might have been a vacation home for a rich person when it was first built. All the windows on each floor had a lovely view. The woods and the mountains past them mesmerized me day or night. I never went out in them, though. I was too busy, really. This was just supposed to be a place for me to sleep in the short term. Then one night, I was laying in bed, and I heard a voice.
I can see you.
I sat up. Had I really heard that? It sounded like a girl or a woman. I looked around, and I saw nobody. Was that a hypnagogic or hypnopompic audio hallucination? It didn't sound as though it were right in my ear. It sounded like it was at the foot of my bed, to the right. I turned on the light next to the bed and got up to investigate the room. Since I found nothing, I figured it was in my head. Getting back into bed, I heard,
I can see you.
It was coming from the window. I raced over and looked out. Of course, it was the second-story window. There was nothing out there but air. I pulled it open and leaned out, looking down and up to see if anyone could possibly have been there, but saw nothing. I wasn't able to get much sleep that night or the next few nights either. At least once during the night, always at different times, and always sounding like it was coming from different places. I would hear that voice.
I can see you.
Always saying the same thing. My boss pulled me into his office at work. It had become obvious I wasn't getting enough sleep. He was nice to me about it, but I could tell that behind his concern lurked impatience, and that I was messing up my promotion. I couldn't tell him that I was losing sleep because I was being haunted by an invisible peeping Thomasina. I made up some excuse and told him I'd get it taken care of. That day, at lunch, I started looking for a different place to live. I contemplated asking one of my buddies at work if I could stay over for a night. But they're both married, and I knew it would be imposing. Plus, I couldn't think of any good reasons why I would need to be there besides, my house is haunted. On the drive home, I thought about getting sleeping pills, but didn't. It would be better if I could lick this naturally. I decided to try sleeping on the couch downstairs just to vary the routine. Maybe the ghost only haunted the second floor. No such luck. Just as I was falling asleep, I heard it again.
I can see you.
It was definitely from outside. This time I was prepared. I went to sleep with my jeans on. I slipped on my boots and coat and ran out the door around to the spot where I had heard the voice emanating from. There was some old snow around there, but there were no footprints in it. I tried stepping lightly on the snow to see if it was icy or soft, and I easily made a print there with my boot. If someone had been there, they would have left prints too. As I was processing this information, I heard, off in the distance, to my left.
I can see you.
Running, I tried to reach the location of the voice as fast as I could. It was in the forest past some trees. I ran for a while, then realized I was probably there, even past the point where it had happened. I still saw nothing. To my right,
I can see you.
again, I ran after the voice. That girl and I were going to reach some closure tonight, no matter what I had to do. My job and my sanity were at stake, so I had to reach her.
I can see you.
To the left. Back I ran, retracing steps, then
I can see you.
forward. And to my right. On and on this went, until I realized I had absolutely no idea where I was in this forest, and I was getting pretty tired from the effort. When I reached this next location, if she wasn't there, I was going to have to give up and try to find my way home. Seeing nobody at all, I stopped running and bent down to catch my breath. Then, from just the other side of the large bush in front of me, I heard,
I can smell you.
well, that was different. Forgetting how tired I felt a second earlier, I tore around the bush with all the speed I could manage, slicing my hands and cheek on some thorns in the process. I got to the other side and found nothing. Once again, nothing. I would have felt crazy if I weren't so annoyed. That's when something touched me on my back and I heard,
I can touch you.
Turning around, I saw no little girl. I saw no adult woman either. What I saw did not look like a girl or a ghost or even a human. What I saw was a monster. It had a long snout and it had pointed ears, but other than that, it did not match the normal description of a dogman. I'd say its snout was more rat-like than dog-like, but that might be because it constantly was twitching in a way that reminded me of a rodent. The teeth were more like a large canine or even feline, not like a rat or hare. The eyes looked insane. It looked diseased. Parts of it looked like they were bubbling, as though it were having trouble maintaining its form, or maybe like something was crawling under its skin. Whatever it was, it screamed at me. Its hot, rotting breath searing my skin and turning my stomach. I ran. I ran and I ran. I had only seen it for a couple seconds. I had only seen it from the chest up, really. I ran till I was out of breath and then ran some more because I never wanted to see it again. I could hear the laughter of a girl as though it were echoing from all around me at once. Maybe it was more than one girl. Maybe it was an army of invisible girls. My heart was beating so hard I was convinced I was going to have an attack. And then I saw it. My car, the house, but mostly my car. I ran in the house, grabbed my clothes for tomorrow and my car keys, then drove off into the night. I Googled for a hotel on my phone, and that night I had my first decent sleep in weeks. So what exactly happened to me? Who or what was making that girl voice? Why would it be working with that Dogman creature? Was the Dogman creature itself something projecting that voice? I never saw it actually speak, and I couldn't imagine that rat snout forming words so delicately. Did I encounter one entity or two? Could it have been a shapeshifter like a shaman or evil wizard from a native culture? Or was it just what it looked like? Some kind of monster dog rat thing. I've read some stuff about infrasound being able to cause hallucinations. Could the creature have been emitting low-frequency sound, and could my own mind have provided the details of what I heard? Or could the creature itself have been an illusion brought on by low-frequency infrasound? My only wounds from the event were inflicted by that unholy bush, so I don't have direct evidence proving that I encountered any physical being. And so, that's why I've been reading about Dogman a lot lately. Is that what I encountered? And if not, does anyone have any idea what this might have been? All I know is, Next time I hear a disembodied voice, I will not, in any way, investigate it. I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279.
Now, I should warn you about this second story before I play it. This was me trying to record back before I had a real microphone. It sounds like I was standing outside in the original. I've tried to fix the audio as much as I can, which is not that much. I thought about reading this one again, but I can't find the file, and I think I just wrote it out longhand and read it from my notebook. This story I find particularly interesting right now because of the changing meaning of one word in the title. And that title is
Real-life cannibalistic humanoid underground dweller, submitted by an anonymous listener, read by Peter Bernard. Welcome to New York City. Years ago, when I was 18, I was production assistant on the movie Chud, or Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dwellers. It was a movie about homeless people living under the streets of Lower Manhattan who were exposed to radioactive material that the government was illegally storing under New York City. These people mutated into big green monsters that ate humans. I got to work during the shoot helping to paint the monster heads and arms at the home of John Caglione, who later won an Academy Award. I got to visit the tunnels and abandoned storehouses underneath the Brooklyn Bridge, and I got to help create a sewer system out of styrofoam board on the third floor of a building overlooking Broadway. The movie, which later became a running joke on The Simpsons, is something I'm very happy to have as a part of my past. That's why I was particularly interested in the following letter sent to me by a lady living in Harlem who wishes me to leave her name unmentioned. I don't think she ever saw the movie Chud. At least she's never mentioned it in her emails to us. But I personally see remarkable similarities between the two stories. If anybody who lives in her neighborhood is watching this video, I'm especially interested in hearing if you've seen or heard of anything being described in these stories I'm about to read. And if you haven't, I'd love to hear that also. I have no idea if this is for real or not, but I'm going to read it because whether true or not, I think these are great stories. The film I worked on back in the 80s is clearly fiction, but this lady says her story is true. Is it a case of life imitating art? Or at least life imitating a low-budget monster picture? I'll read her letter to you and let you decide for yourself. Dear Scary Stories New York City, I have a scary story for you that takes place in New York City, and it's still happening now even as I write this to you. For my entire life, I've lived up in Harlem, all the way on the west side in a tall apartment building near Riverside Drive. It was my family's apartment when I was a kid, then my parents moved to Yonkers and it's been mine since. I've seen the neighborhood change in a lot of ways, but the strangest and most troubling change has been the arrival of the sewer people. I should probably call them sewer monsters because they don't really look like people. Well, they have heads and arms and legs and so on, and some of them seem to be wearing clothes. The relationship to humans pretty much ends there though. They seem taller, and their skin is a light color. I've only seen them at night under orange streetlights or fluorescent lights, so I'm not 100% certain of their skin tone, but they are not Caucasian or any skin type I've ever seen before. They seem to have grayish, almost greenish skin. I remind you that I've only seen them at night under artificial lighting, and they usually are darting quickly from one shadow to the next like vermin. I've seen them, my neighbor in the next apartment has seen them, my goddaughter says she's seen them, and the super in my building has seen them as well. He says they're tunneling now, moving further and further out into the neighborhood. We all know we're talking about the same thing because these creatures are not just pale. These creatures sort of glow. I can't think of a better way to put it, even though I know it sounds stupid. They don't shine like beacons or light bulbs or even lightning bugs. They sort of glow almost like an old glow-in-the-dark decal from the 1970s that was running out of glow power. It's sort of almost a minty yet sickly green glow, and you would notice it more out of the corner of your eye than when looking at them directly. Some of God's creatures are blessed with the gift of camouflage, but these things have anti-camouflage. You notice them even if you're not trying to. The first story I want to tell you about them is not the first that happened chronologically, but I personally suspect it might be the most important. One night last summer, my neighbor and some friends were hanging out on our roof, which has a view of the water and New Jersey in the distance. Someone shouted at all of us to look, and what we saw was one of the monsters I'm telling you about actually crossing the Henry Hudson Parkway over there, just walking like a pedestrian. Cars were screeching to stops. One of them clipped the monster, but it just kept going like it didn't care. A car slammed into the back of a van, and there was all this chaos, but the monster didn't react to any of it. It dove off the edge of the parkway into the water. We all gasped as we thought it was killing itself. It was a horrible thing to look at. But then we all noticed it was swimming. It was still alive, and it was swimming out to that waste treatment plant out there. It swam underneath, and that was the last we saw of it. The general impression that night was that it was swimming under the building and then beyond it out of our line of vision. I don't know why we thought that, because since then I've wondered if maybe something under the waste treatment plant was what attracted it. Because since then I've come to think that maybe these monsters are mutations of nature. I think that because I got to see them up close 2 times, and fairly close a handful of others, and the kinds of deformations on the things look different on each of them. I guess the only way to explain would be to get into detail, so here are a few more stories to try to explain what I'm saying. The first time I saw one of them at a fairly close range was in the subway. I was standing on the platform of the City College stop of the number 1 train on the downtown side. It was around 8 in the evening, and I had just missed a train, so the platform was empty. I was visiting a friend downtown who lives near the northernmost exit of the 23rd Street stop, so I walked to the back of the platform to save myself time later. There I heard a ticking sound coming from down on the tracks. It was rhythmic for a while, and I wondered if it were a clock. Suddenly it dawned on me that time bombs in the movies ticked like clocks, so maybe I should get away from there and go tell someone. Before I ran away, curiosity got the better of me, and I had to bend over and peek down the track in the direction of the noise, just outside the station. I don't know what I was looking for or what I was expecting to see, but what I saw was a bald-headed man squatting near the 3rd rail. He was glowing lightly in the darkness, as I've described before. He was reaching out toward the 3rd rail with his right pointer finger, and each time he got close, a little electric bolt would shoot out into his finger, making the sparking sound that I had taken for a ticking noise. I screamed, because I thought he was going to electrocute himself, and he turned and looked at me directly. This was not a bald man. This was not a man at all. Its eyes were entirely white. There were no pupils at all. Its ears stuck out from the side of its head, each at different angles, not matching the other. It had the wrong number of fingers on each hand. It stood quickly to its feet in an amazingly fast and athletic, yet still warped and inhuman fashion. I screamed again and took a few steps back, and the creature did the strangest sort of side flip I'd ever seen. I can't even describe it. I don't know what it did exactly, but somehow it somersaulted sideways and was now standing on the platform directly in front of me, under the harsh fluorescent lights. It looked as though it were in a stupor, and I wondered if it were just curious about me. Then it growled. Real-life cannibalistic humanoid underground dweller, Part 2. Submitted by an anonymous listener, read by Peter Bernard. This lady says she and her other friends living in the West 130s are seeing strange man-like but mutated creatures roaming the neighborhood at night. They saw one swim out to the waste treatment plant located off the shoreline, and suspicions are that toxic waste somehow played a part in their coming into existence. As we begin Part 2, the lady had just seen one of the creatures touching the electrified 3rd rail on the subway track just to amuse itself. After she screamed, the creature executed an Olympic-quality sideways leap, and now the lady found herself standing directly in front of some sort of mutated, underground humanoid. Let's now resume the letter. In the lady's words. It growled. This huge man-like thing growled at me. In the blinking fluorescent light, this thing appeared to have grayish-greenish skin, but mottled all over. It had growths everywhere, which were each made of every color of the rainbow. Its completely white eyes did not seem blind, and I felt myself unable to move or even unlock my gaze from them. I could sense it had clothes on, but at the same time it sort of felt like the clothes were... I don't know how to say it. I guess it felt like they were melted into the creature's skin. Like it had those clothes on, then the skin mutated and grew out over the clothes. I'm not saying I observed this specifically because, as I said, I couldn't really take my eyes away from its gaze. These were all peripheral impressions, so I can't swear by them. The monster man opened its mouth to scream and showed an array of teeth, none matching the next one. Then it uttered a bellow, standing so close to me that I could smell its terrible breath. I realized I was blacking out and sat myself down on the concrete before I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was minus my pocketbook, but otherwise fine. I guess when I fainted, it went away. And then after it was gone, someone stole my pocketbook. Really nice of nobody to help me, but what can you do? I went home to put a stop to my credit cards before much damage could be done, and was too busy over the next few weeks dealing with the loss of my money and personal items to put much more thought into the monster encounter. In fact, it never even occurred to me to avoid that train station or to alert the authorities to the presence of the creatures, if they even would have believed me anyway. It was a few weeks after that. I had just managed to get a new cell phone that day, long story. I was coming home from hanging with my friend, and as I took one step onto the platform at 137th Street, I hesitated. Suddenly I remembered what happened to me the last time I'd been in this station. I stood there, thinking about getting back in. The walk from the next station wouldn't be something I would want to make that late at night. I was tired, it was after midnight, and I just wanted to get home. The car door closed on me, waking me from my reverie, and I jumped out of the train. Walking as quickly as I could toward the exit, I cursed myself for not sitting in the car closest to it. Now I had to practically walk down the entire platform to get out. The train left the station loudly, and I rushed faster. I felt a sort of safety as long as it was still in the station. Once it was gone, I would be alone, as the only other passenger who got off here was already up the stairs and gone. I felt my heart beating faster, and I decided this would be my last time ever in this particular train station, whether I got out safely or not. I was passing one of those large garbage bins they have on the platforms when a rat ran out in front of me, jumping back down onto the tracks. I thought I was going to have a heart attack, but the instant I realized what it was, an immense sense of relief washed over me. At least it wasn't one of those monsters. That relief was short-lived, as now with a crash and a sickening grunt, something else flew out from behind the garbage bin. Something barely missed me by an inch. It was another one of these monster mutant men, and it was chasing the rat. It flung its body onto the tracks, and I heard a lot of scuffling as both the rat and the monster ran across the tracks to the other side and straight into a large fissure in the underside of the downtown platform. A mouse hole. They basically ran into a mouse hole. Looking back at the garbage bin, I could now see that there was a large crevice eaten out of the wall behind that as well. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that I screamed and I ran all the way home. That was the last time I ever used that station, but not the last time I saw one of these creatures. I can give you more stories about these things than you would have time to listen to. What I want to know is, what are they? What if they aren't human beings who mutated? What if these are the trolls of legend? What if these things have always lived underground and only now by accident they tunneled into my neighborhood? But if they are a true species of their own, why do they seem deformed? And why are all their deformities so different from each other? And why have I never seen a female? Actually, maybe I have and I just couldn't tell. I'm not going to move out of my home. I lived here when crime was rampant and my own cousin was robbed right in front of my own building. I'm not going to run away because of some gross human rat things. Maybe the city already is aware of them. I can't imagine that the people who work at the waste plant out in the water haven't seen them. Maybe the things were born there. Maybe they live there. Or maybe they just swim there to feed. I have more maybes about these things than I have facts. But I'm trying to talk my neighbors into joining me and going to see maybe the police or maybe our city council rep. So far, everyone is too afraid they'll be labeled crazy. The general attitude is that the city must know about it already and it's probably already being taken care of. But my super says they're growing in numbers and nobody's doing anything about it. This is my attempt to reach out and alert the public about this phenomenon, But even this I want to do anonymously. I don't mind if you don't believe me, but I hope you tell this story on your show. If I'm lying, then it's just some entertainment for your channel. But if I'm telling the truth, then maybe, just maybe, someone will do something to stop these creatures from infesting our neighborhood and our city. Thank you for your time.
Everybody loves Godzilla Tim. There's no one that don't love him. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer, Godzilla Tim, for making this episode possible. Godzilla Tim is a channel member who receives all our perks, like secret episodes, and then sometimes he donates to us either through our PayPal or by using our new thanks button under each of our YouTube videos. If not for Godzilla Tim, we'd be like Tokyo after it got trampled by giant monsters again. But this Godzilla is a builder, not a destroyer, and he's a huge reason we're even still here telling scary stories. Thank you, Godzilla Tim. And now to explain how you too can become as cool and highly regarded as Godzilla Tim is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.